The Mozart Oboe Concerto K314. The Mozart Oboe Concerto K314 in C major was composed between April and October of 1777 for oboist Giuseppe Ferlandis, who played in the Salzburg Hofkapelle Orchestra. Ferlandis was a popular and talented oboist, and Mozart's father spoke very highly of him. At the time, the new Archbishop Colloredo of Salzburg was making many changes to the music culture in the area. The entire Mozart family had great contempt for Colloredo, and later in 1777, Wolfgang and his mother left Salzburg looking for further employment for Wolfgang. After Mozart had left, his father sent him a letter saying, "And if you had a copy of your oboe concerto, Herwein might enable you to make an honest penny in Wallerstein." This was the first reference to Wolfgang Mozart's oboe concerto, which had apparently been a great success in Salzburg. In 1778, he wrote in another letter to his father, "Ramm played my oboe concerto for Ferlandis for the 5th time. It is attracting much attention and is now Ramm's cheval de bataille." Ramm was an oboist who had played in the orchestra in Salzburg during the time of Archbishop Colloredo. Ramm and two flautists, Johann Baptist Wedling and H. de Jean, were to travel with Mozart to Paris. Prior to their trip, H. de Jean commissioned Mozart to write several pieces for flute, including 2 flute concertos for 200 gulden. The Mozart family was struggling financially at that time, so 200 gulden was a significant sum of money. Wolfgang stayed with the Weber family, who were musicians in the area. There is evidence that he might have been in love with the Webers' 17-year-old daughter. Aloisa and Mozart decided not to travel with Jean and Ramm to Paris, perhaps so that Mozart would not have to leave Aloisa. Mozart failed to complete the commission, perhaps because of his infatuation with the Weber's daughter, his busyness at the time, and his dislike for composing for the flute. Before de Jean left for Paris, he had composed only one original flute concerto and a flute quartet, among a few other flute pieces, meaning only half the commission. There is significant evidence that instead of writing an original concerto for flute, he simply transposed the oboe concerto in C major to D major, which was a traditional key for flautists at the time, hoping that de Jean would accept the work as original and pay him the full 200 gulden. De Jean only paid Wolfgang 96 gulden, obviously recognizing the D major flute concerto as a copy of the C major oboe concerto. Now to the musical analysis. The structure of the first movement consists of 3 sections, A, B, and C, and a recapitulation at the end. While written in C major, the first movement of the concerto contains significant portions that are in G major. About half of sections A is written in C major. The first measure is a C major scale that is used as a pickup into a high C that is held for 4 measures. Through this scale and high C, the key is clearly established. However, the first major key change, deviation, happens in measure 50, which starts on a G. Mozart consistently adds in F-sharp accidentals, making it obvious that he has changed to G major. He remains in G until about measure 109, when the music becomes more chromatic. Instead of mostly F-sharp accidentals, we begin to see flats and chromatic scales, until finally he concludes the idea on a high C, which brings the key back into C major for the rest of the movement as is shown in the excerpts on the screen. To further solidify the return to C major, Mozart begins measure 122 by holding out a long high C for 2 whole measures and echo the first few measures of the movement. Mozart uses several motives and themes, which are mostly centered on C or G major scales and arpeggios. For example, at the beginning of each section, Mozart introduces a theme or motive at that section and later embellishes it with scales and arpeggios centered on that theme. A technique Mozart uses to embellish and expand on this theme is to use accidentals and trills that lead back into C major and G major. Mozart uses this method consistently throughout the movement. For example, a common motive in the movement is an 8th note followed by an 8th note trill leading to descending 8th notes and arpeggios. This happens first in measure 50 when we move from C major to G major. It happens again at the beginning of C section. In fact, this motive only happens at the beginning of a section or new theme. The very first measure when the oboe enters is a similar theme, but instead of the trill leading to a descending arpeggios, it is followed by a staccato C major scale and sustained high C. Another example of a popular theme in the first movement comprises measures 44 through 46, where Mozart uses simple first inversion C major arpeggios in 16th notes. Toward the end of the piece, in measures 136 through 141, he repeats the same arpeggios in C major first inversion, but extends the line, adding other motives from various parts of the movement. Mozart continues with this pattern of arpeggios in yet another arpeggiated theme in measures 90 through 91 and 167 through 168, which are similar to the 16-note scales and triplets in the rest of the movement, but add contrast and are used in the middle and end of the movement instead of the introduction of a theme or motive. Triplets are also used in measures 116 and 117 as a variation on the scale, moving from G major and eventually resolving into C major in measure 120. In these examples, Mozart is employing the triplet themes for contrast, variety, and harmonic direction. The theme of the B section begins with the oboe without accompaniment, playing two D half notes preceded by an E grace note. Mozart uses grace notes as a common embellishment throughout the movement, but the only other time they are isolated, like in this example, is in measures 153 through 154 at the beginning of section B1. The next theme is a descending C major melodic triad, followed immediately by a descending G major melodic triad. This sets the stage for the rest of the B section, which changes between C major and G major quite frequently, with 16-note scales and triplet arpeggios. The B section is the shortest, but is later repeated and embellished at the last section of the movement. The high point of the piece is at the recapitulation in section B1. Mozart takes mostly themes from section B and embellishes them, repeating them in sequence back to back with few quarter notes and rests. He builds to the high point using chromatic line of 16th notes in measures 161 through 165. After each repeat of a theme from section B, he ends with an unresolved half-note trill and then begins the next theme, as you can see in the second example on the screen. Finally, he ends with a long C major scale and a trill into C quarter note. Essentially, the climax is an extension and intensification of the major themes in section B. The Baron-Reiter-Urtext edition of the Mozart Oboe Concerto has two examples of cadenzas that may be used at the end of the movement. Each feature variations of themes already mentioned above. The orchestra continues with 9 measures and peacefully ends the movement with 3 quarter note C major chords. Beyond the major themes of the movement, there are some interesting moments and embellishments that are employed consistently throughout the movement. For example, Mozart often writes intervals that leap higher than an octave when leading to a new idea. The first time this happens is in measure 60 when jumping from B to high D when beginning the new theme after a 16th note run. This also happens in measures 85, 107, and 110 as embellishments and to add interest. In measures 138, 140, 142, and 173, 10-note intervals are used to break up long lines of 16-note arpeggios. Mozart uses techniques such as chromatics, accidentals, and minor scales to add intensity and drama to the movement. Since this piece is centered around C and G major, Mozart adds a lot of chromatic scales and lines such in measure 147. Here he uses a chromatic scale from C to C and ends in repeated high C eighth notes, as you can see on the screen. This section is reminiscent of the first few measures of the piece, where a similar scale in 147 provides contrast. In section C, Mozart creates tension by adding accidentals, which create a minor fill. For example, in measures 116 through 117, Mozart uses ascending triplets in major mode, and then changes to 16th notes, adding a C-sharp accidental in measure 118. In the next measure, 119, the C changes to C natural, and the line resolves with the C major scale bringing the piece from G major to C major once again. Another interesting embellishment that is seen very frequently throughout the movement is the grace note. Mozart uses grace notes in section B and C and uses them very similarly but progressively. At the beginning of section B, the grace notes lead into the new theme of a C major triad. They are simply embellishing repeated D half notes and ending on a D quarter note. The grace notes add suspense to the new theme being presented, as you can see in the example above. In section C, while the theme of trills and arpeggios is being repeated, Mozart adds grace notes into the next line, which feels like an echo of the introduction to section B. Since most of the movement consists of flourishing 16th notes and skipping triplets, when Mozart uses whole notes, he does so at the most important moments. In each case, the whole note feels like a buffer between the next motive. For example, in measure 72, a high G is held, which leads to a descending line which eventually resolves. The high C at the beginning is a dramatic way to introduce the key of C and allow the oboe to soar above the orchestra. It is an interesting contrast to the rest of the piece, which is mostly fast and staccato. The orchestral accompaniment to the first movement is relatively simple. The orchestra plays mainly even quarter notes or eighth notes as harmonies below the fast-moving parts and allows the oboe to clearly stand out. For example, one measure before the oboist comes in, the orchestra plays a transitional trill motive and then rests for one measure before playing a C major chord in the next measure. During especially quick passages, the orchestra outlines the main chords with simple quarter notes. The quarter notes in the passage below on the screen articulate the inverted arpeggios of the soloist. Mozart's Oboe Concerto is a beautiful and technically challenging piece for the soloist. It's no wonder that Mozart entrusted it to such a capable oboist such as Ferlandis in 1777. The C major and G major themes of brisk 16th notes, grace notes, trills, and arpeggios challenge the oboe's fingering and tonguing dexterity and accuracy. However, when played correctly, the concerto has a beautiful, buoyant, and bright character that is quite memorable and enjoyable.